I left 12 years ago, but his cruelty still lives in my bones. My body remembers the crushed glass lying on the floor like a memorial, and the seemingly ordinary door that I would walk through to another life, and in many ways to the same life in a different shade. No one thing is any one thing, my mom often told me when I was growing up. When I go to the airport, any airport, it's the thing that slows my heart to a congealed mass. It's the thing that sends me reeling back in time through the black hole of grief. It catapults me to former selves and former lives I never wanted to meet again. But I also refuse to let this hold me back from my future. In an Uber, as I glide past the black and white sign welcoming me to Seattle Tacoma International Airport, my stomach involutes into a sinkhole. With each heartbeat, I hear a voice, maybe my own, maybe someone else's, repeating, "You're going to die today. You're going to die." It never truly dissipates until I am safely at my destination. What I left still haunts me. It was 2012 in a dark room with air thick like unflavored gelatin. It was no particular day in 2012 because it was every day. We had no money, my love and I, so we lived in the basement of someone's house in a town I didn't know the name of, at an address that was also unknown to me. He'd picked me up from a San Francisco domestic violence shelter where I had been staying for a month since I ran away from him the first time. I'm not from California, so all I knew is that we went north on the freeway. In our home, wherever it was, the only light was from the black Baphomet prayer candle that burned day and night, casting shadows on the dank walls. I didn't know what else to do, so I sucked down a bottle of vodka straight from the container. I waded in a pool of my own blood, in a pool of my warm drunkenness, for my love to come back home. I waited for him in more ways than one. I needed a syrupy word or even just a hand that wasn't cruel. What I got instead was battle. What I got was sex that reduced me to ashes and the constant reminder that he was going to eat my flesh and hurl my bones into an empty field, with the caveat that no one would ever miss me. He pointed out which field when we passed it in his truck, and the wildflowers there reminded me of my childhood home. My mom had told me once that she loves airports because she likes to imagine she could go anywhere in the world. I've hated them since I started running away. Domestic violence, homelessness. The only time in recent memory I've been to airports is to run toward or away from bad men. The second and final time I left my love in 2012, I told him my father had a heart attack and I needed to fly home to make things right with him. There were no Ubers at the time. The town was too rural for buses. For a taxi, I would have had to give a pickup address, which I didn't know. So I lied. I was so drunk when his truck pulled up to Oakland International Airport, I couldn't see his face clearly except for his eyes. The same eyes that he'd looked at me with when we first met, like we'd already spent a lifetime together. That looked at me like I never needed to worry about not being chosen ever again. Before I got out of his truck at the terminal, he grabbed my hands with tears in his eyes because he knew. I know that now. It's amazing the glimmers of acknowledgement shit men show you when they know they've been shit. "You're not going to leave me," he pleaded, "are you?" The first time it happened, 2 years earlier, I was in his bed, pushing him away and yelling no. Once he was done, he tried to hold me tenderly. He said he was sorry in a hushed tone that was both fire and salve. He held me with his eyes that terrorized me but also made me feel seen, for maybe the first time in my life. The things I've had to do to survive were part of the price I paid to be seen. Just being here today has come at a cost I won't explain to you. Freedom in one moment became bondage in the next. Chains exploded into power. No one thing is any one thing. After I left San Francisco, I was hooking regularly to survive and failing miserably at the survival part. But the thing about the sex industry is that agency and empowerment can exist side by side with exploitation and violence, sort of like relationships with men. Sex work isn't bad a lot of the time. Sometimes it's even fun. No one thing. Although I've experienced everything you can imagine in the sex industry, from violence to sexual exaltation, I've never been raped or beaten or betrayed as much as I have by the men who were supposed to love and protect me. One night after my love had strangled me for the first time, I started gathering all my clothes in a suitcase. He cried and reached out and grabbed my hands to hold them and told me with tears streaming down his face that this had always been his problem. I cried too with my hands in his, victim and perpetrator, but also just two flawed people in love. The sweetness he brought to me after the dark times sustained me through the turbulence. They also bonded me to him with a kind of sick hope. Holding complexity is the thing we don't do but need to.
So thank you so much for sharing that incredible piece with us. You've done a lot of writing about your experiences in sex work, but typically that has appeared in more traditionally journalistic outlets. So can you tell me a little bit about how you approached writing more of a creative nonfiction piece?
Yeah, well, a lot of my journalistic pieces have like a personal essay element in them. So I don't think the concept was too foreign. It was more just like expanding upon the things that maybe I had already kind of briefly or vaguely touched on in more journalistic pieces, which actually felt really good to be able to do that and just kind of open up those times in my life.
So you talk in your piece about the idea of holding complexity, and I was wondering how you approach that in your writing in terms of balancing the coexisting topics like love and abuse without romanticizing anything that we wouldn't want to.
Yeah, well, to me, and I think I allude to it in the piece, one of the things that made it the most difficult for me to leave that situation, that situation of domestic violence, was that it wasn't all bad. And I think there's sort of a conception that, people who are in abusive relationships are stupid because, why would you accept that kind of treatment? But it's really not that treatment all the time. And there's this cycle of like abuse and then sort of like a happy time, like a honeymoon period, I guess you would call it, where maybe the abuser is trying to make up for the behavior and make sure that they kind of reel the victim or survivor back in, after a period of abuse. So it really isn't all just one thing. And I think that's sort of the gray area or the complexity that we look over when we talk about intimate partner violence.
Building on that, can you talk a little bit more about the idea of no one thing, which eventually became the title of a piece and a recurring motif that developed over the course of editing?
Yeah, so one of the big inspirations, besides that particular relationship in which I experienced DV, was also my times in the sex industry. And I think kind of similarly to DV, there's sort of a perception that work in the sex industry is all one thing. And that one thing is usually like negative, exploitative, destructive. And I myself identify as a sex trafficking survivor and a sex worker. So there's like a trajectory of choice that I think, which is a complexity, which doesn't get talked about a lot. And also that it's not like either or, it's not sex trafficking victim or sex worker. There are, most people I know who've been in the sex industry have experiences with exploitation, along with experiences with feeling empowered and having bodily autonomy and all those things. So yeah, it's just another example of like the complexity that I think society and a lot of times the legal system kind of refuses to acknowledge, and sort of puts us in this binary position that really doesn't allow us to take into account like the full spectrum and magnitude of these issues.
So, building off of that, can you discuss where this piece fits in with the theme of this issue, which is body politic, as well as your broader body of work and BLR's themes of health, healing, and the body?
Yeah, so those are kind of central themes just because of the nature of being a trauma survivor, childhood abuse survivor, in adulthood, DV survivor, sex trafficking. So to me, like one of the most central issues, I think, and actually I'm writing a memoir right now, and this writing the manuscript has kind of made me realize that like advocating against sexual shame has been kind of a key theme or thread in all of my work. And that goes for like everything from DV to trafficking to just encounters with men that are patriarchal and sexist. So yeah, I think shame is also a really important aspect to my writing. And I think I do address it in this piece, especially with the times in which sex work felt more exploitative to me, or I didn't feel like I had, because of my economic situation, I didn't have the proper agency really to be able to choose like who I worked with, to be able to say no to XYZ price or whatever. So which again is like on a trajectory of choice, but it also was something that I could do, the survival sex work, that was helpful to my mental health, because I'm also someone living with bipolar 1 disorder. And it allowed me to be my own boss. It allowed me to have some degree of control over when I worked, some degree of control over who I worked with, things like that. So I think that's where the no one thing comes in, is like, work in the sex industry has been so many things to me at so many different times, and it's treated politically as if it's all just in this box of exploitation, and that's all it is. So I think this work really fits in with this issue because it's all about bodily autonomy and kind of navigating my own agency within my body, and also as like a deeply political body, which so many underserved communities, you know, are or inhabit.
Would you be willing to tell us a little bit more about your memoir in progress?
Yeah, sure. So I actually have three. I kind of bounce back and forth. Like I get this like existential angst on one, and then I go to another. And so the first one is the one that I've been working on the longest, is about generational trauma in the form of sexual abuse, and really just about shame, I guess. So my journey to kind of find myself in my body, and find what agency means to me in my body. You know, in the manuscript, I go through everything from like diving really deep into kind of subterranean kink communities, and meeting kind of nefarious people in my search for reclamation of my body as a trauma survivor. So that's what that one is about. And then there's another one I'm kind of working on more prominently right now, which is kind of about my journey because I'm also in recovery for, it was actually 9 years on the third.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. So my journey of recovery and how that journey kind of ties into discovering my body and sort of intersecting also with sex work. And then because 9 years ago, when I got sober for this like last time, because it was kind of a journey my whole life of trying to get sober, was when I started writing. And so for me, like that healing act or healing journey was what really allowed me to be on this trajectory of discovering being a writer and really being political about the body and political about sexual shame and sex work and being a sex workers' rights activist, basically. So yeah, it's kind of that journey from self-destruction to like going to speak at the UN and testify against the United States government for sex workers' rights and stuff. So yeah, I guess a lot of it's about bodily autonomy. So that's a pretty big theme.
They all sound great, and we will look forward to reading them.
Yeah, thank you.
Just a couple of things that have come up in the course of our conversation. You've mentioned mental illness, you've mentioned recovery, you've mentioned sex work and DV, and these are all different but interrelated topics. So how do you approach weaving these things together, and how do they interplay in your work?
Yeah, I think it's really hard because I'm very conscious of not playing into stereotypes, like most prominently with writing about addiction or writing about sex work. I don't want to pigeonhole myself. So one kind of landmine that I'm always trying to sidestep is giving people the idea or reinforcing the idea that sex work is exploitative. Like even when I'm talking about, yes, it can be exploitative, you know, but the complexity and there's all these other things. And just for simplicity's sake, I think that people tend to gravitate to the most like convenient, simple explanation for things, which I think is just a basic human thing that we do. So I think, because primarily my work is writing about myself and my experiences. So I try to, one, like not generalize, especially when I'm writing about my struggle with addiction and alcoholism, because I believe in harm reduction. And I believe that like, you know, other people can do whatever they want. I don't try to push like certain programs or anything on other people, but I try to write my experience as authentically as I can while still respecting other people's experiences, because they're all varied. Like nobody has the same experience with sex work or, you know, drugs and alcohol or any of those things. And then I think also just trying to like bring humanity to some things that maybe some people are closed-minded towards. So trying to make sure that I, and this is more of like a literary technique type thing, but just trying to make sure that there are universals that everybody can relate to, you know, like there are certain things, just even if you haven't done drugs or you don't identify as an addict or any of those things, like I still want to bring basic universality, whatever the word would be, to certain human experiences, like feelings of failure, grief, loss, you know, beating yourself up because you made mistakes or things like that that are universal. So I think, yeah, I think those are the devices that I try to bring to my writing, just to make it as authentic to me as I can, because that's at the end of the day, like I love if people love my writing, but honestly, because I write about such intimate topics that I am still trying to heal from, like it really is just for me at the end of the day. And of course, I hope other people like it as well.
Speaking of literary techniques, can you talk a little bit about how the focus of the piece shifted over time during the process of editing?
Yeah, definitely. So I think when I originally wrote this piece, which I love the process of how it kind of developed and went from one thing that it needed to be at one time to like
No
another
one
thing.
thing.
Yeah, that it really needed to be. Yeah, it's kind of like a child growing up or something. So originally, I was kind of trying to capture the desperation of survival, and trying to capture uh, feelings of failure that I left this relationship in 2012, which was violent and destructive. And then I went on to what I felt like was be a failure. And not because I was in the sex industry, but because like I was constantly getting eviction notices. I was homeless. I had no money. I couldn't eat, all these things. And it's like, why did I leave? You know, I had a place to live. You know, I had money to pay for food and things like that. Why did I do that? And then, like, to me, there was an inherent promise, and I don't even know where this came from, maybe just society, but there was a promise in leaving this bad relationship that, okay, if you do the right thing, you're going to get rewarded, you know, and like if you leave this bad relationship, like the universe will make a way for you, and things will be easy. And they weren't. And I felt really angry and resentful of that I was like, I went from being exploited in one way to feeling exploited in just another way. And it was like, you know, this is kind of bullshit, honestly. So, yeah. And then it kind of went to, which I think is not like a totally opposing concept of like the complexity of all these issues, which sort of was, I feel like, another really important concept to me. It was just something different. You know, it's like you can write about a lot of the same experiences in different ways and have them be different pieces, and they're all really important and relevant to you. So,
what do you hope readers will take away from your piece?
That's a good question. I think, you know, I said, firstly, I write for myself in my own healing. And of course, I hope other people get something out of it too. Secondarily, I write for other people who are survivors of trauma in whatever form that takes. And I hope that in my writing, they can feel seen and they can feel like validated in their feelings and their experiences.
Is there anything you haven't gotten to say that you think we should know?
I don't think so. This has just been like a super cool process, you know, to really dig into a personal essay, like you said, as opposed to something that's more journalistic, which kind of has to have like hooks into, you know, modern news stories and stuff.
And I can say I had a great time editing you as well and working on this piece. So we're very thankful to have it at BLR.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.